Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alta Journal's California Book Club. It's a thrill to be here tonight for Danzy Senna's Colored Television. We'll be joined by host John Freeman and special guest Porochista Khakpour. My name is Blaise Zariga. I'm Alta Journal's editorial director, and we've got a full house tonight. So I encourage everyone to please say hello. Let us know in the chat where you're zooming in from. I'm broadcasting live from foggy San Francisco this evening. While you're all doing that, I wanted to run through some housekeeping. Tonight's event is part of the California Book Club. It's Alta's free monthly gathering. We celebrate books that help form a definitive guide to understanding life in the Golden State. And in the weeks leading up to each club meeting, altaonline.com publishes numerous articles, an excerpt, an interview, essays about that month's pick. And if you haven't had a chance to read them, you'll want to make sure you go back and do so. Check out the fantastic essays by John Freeman, by California Book Club editor Anita Felicelli, writer Rashida Saka. There's even a comic by Nicole Lefebvre. There's an excerpt, I already mentioned that, and there's more. We even commissioned a special book tale, not a cocktail, a book tale, and appropriately, it's called Colored Television. It's a twist on the rank odors in Jane's Mommobile, which, you know, if you've been in a car with small children, you know, it's fermented apple juice and rotten apple slices, some cheese sticks, whatever. But it's a twist on that, of course. Apple brandy, lemon juice, simple syrup, and garnished with an apple slice. It's very refreshing. Think of it as a mother's little helper. And all the articles included in the California Book Club on the website and in our newsletter. Please sign up for our newsletter, are free. We also have several other newsletters that you might like. Again, they're free. Theme here. So sign up, please. Trust me, you're going to love our newsletters. And every CBC episode, so tonight's program will be recorded and available for watching tonight on YouTube and on our site. And this club would not be possible without the amazing support of our partners. I'd like to thank them. The Los Angeles Public Library, the San Francisco Public Library, the Huntington USC Institute on California in the West, Book Passage, Book Soup, Vromans, Diesel the Bookstore, Books Inc., Green Apple Books, Bookshop West Portal, Narrative Magazine, and Ziziva. And please support our partners. If you don't already have a copy of this book, visit one of these great booksellers, pick one up. And if you already have a copy, then why don't you pick one up for a friend and pass it along. And you too, please, you can support the work we do by becoming a member of Alta Journal. Just visit altaonline.com and click join. For $50 a month, pardon me, $50 a year. $50 a year, you get our award-winning quarterly, 4 issues a year of this large, oversized, beautiful format magazine, unlimited access to everything we do online. We're also giving you, including in the offer, the 5 years worth of Altitude cartoons. We poke fun at ourselves, at life here in California in the West. And tonight, in each issue, we do a special preview of the California Book Club authors. And in this current edition, you can purchase it on our site. And there's this wonderful essay by Danzy Senna about why it's titled Why Write. We also have a little essay here by David Hewlin, our books editor. Great photography. And it's lots here to check out. So please consider supporting us. And if that price isn't right, or you want to be online only, we have digital memberships for $3 a month. And again, visit our store, visit our site. On the store, you can buy single issues. And no tax and free shipping all the time. We always do that. All right. And there's also some cool merch. If you haven't already got your clothes for back to school, check out a cool CBC hat. I should have adjusted that. You can get tote bags, the Didion, the CBC. There's t-shirts, all kinds of stuff. So that's it. That's enough of my pitch, but please consider supporting us. Join Alta today. It's altaonline.com. So without further ado, I know we're all anxious to get started. Please let me turn this over to the host of tonight's California Book Club gathering, John Freeman.
Thanks, Blaise. Hello, everyone, from Turlock to San Francisco to Las Vegas. It's great to be back, to be here for today's book club about Colored Television by Danzy Senna. I think all of us remember when we read something by an author who we think, oh my God, I'm going to read everything this person writes. And for me, it was a short story called The Care of the Self. It was a long short story about two friends who meet up. One has gotten divorced, and it folds through time. This is a short story that Danzy Senna wrote. And you realize in the course of this meeting that the two friends who have just met up, their lives were not always in that order. In fact, they had been completely flipped around. One was the enviable person whose life seemed the picture of domestic bliss, but in fact, it was crumbling from within. And reading this story, you get all the things that Danzy Senna is so good at, friendships, and especially amongst women, the sense that the way that we project our lives outward is not how they are actually lived, and the deep enmeshment between us and everyone around us who we feel close to or even friends with, and the way we judge our lives together with them. It makes it amazing fiction. I read this short story about 10, 12, 15 years ago, and I thought, anything this woman writes, I will read. And I went back through her work and read Caucasia, her debut novel, which won the Stephen Crane Award, her second novel, Symptomatic. And one of the things about being a Danzy Senna fan is that you kind of have to wait a little bit, but it's worth the wait. And what's exciting about today is not only has Danzy Senna published a new novel, but it is unequivocally a triumph, her best novel yet, deeply funny, so broad about that it can put in things there about family life, about competition within a marriage, about what it's like to work on the fringes of Hollywood, how to work in an industry that is constantly exploiting you, how to not exploit your own inner life. It's just a profoundly good book about television, which is a very difficult thing to do in a state in which we worship television and the industry which makes it. You might know in the course of this conversation, we'll ask Danzy some questions, but to get it out of the way, she was born in Boston, the child and grandchild of writers, also the child of a musical prodigy. She grew up there, went to Stanford, studied American Studies, got her MFA at California Irvine, and lived around the world, London, elsewhere, New York, has settled in LA, where she teaches at USC and is the author of 4 novels, a short story collection, and a memoir, Where Did You Sleep Last Night? Most importantly, but just as a side thing, she's also on the California Book Club selection committee, and we had to twist her arm to be part of this. But her novel is so good, and it feels like a triumph, like we should celebrate, and it's nice to have something to laugh about, even if it's about very serious things. So please join me in welcoming Danzy Senna. Hey,
Thank
Danzy.
you so much, John. I love that introduction.
There's a lot to say, a lot to cover, but I want to just jump right in because this is one of the last novels I can remember in my mind in the last couple of years that made me laugh out loud. Where breath, I didn't just go, huh? It was just real guffaws, and sometimes it was a line where at some point you describe the producer that your main character Jane gets kind of sucked into working with, where he takes naps like a sort of Tesla recharging himself. To her husband, who is an artist, who kind of is Black and it kind of dreams of taking their family away from the toxic environment of LA, and she describes his lifestyle dream as of the kind of witness protection program lifestyle. And I'm curious what you find funny, and what you've consistently found funny over life, and because this feels like you stepping forward and claiming your humor in a big way.
Yeah, it's funny. I think all of my work has a lot of comedy in it, but I think in this book I sort of allowed myself to really, as you said, claim it or lean into it. And I think it feels like a really transgressive tone actually at this moment. I think we've been besieged by earnestness in both, extremes of the sides of the country and in people's the social media tone of sort of humble bragging and just kind of taking everything as an opportunity to position oneself as above other people. And so for me, the joke is always kind of on myself. Like I'm the first butt of every joke I make. And the world that I live in and inhabit is always sort of the thing I'm most making fun of, but then there are casualties all around it. And but I think, you know, comedy has been a huge part of my family, the family that I grew up in, my father and my mother and my siblings. And we grew up, you know, I grew up in Boston in the 1970s when being biracial, artists who didn't have any money, there was a lot of ways that I felt outside of the mainstream, and sort of it was very easy to feel other, like you were the other amongst others. And I think my father in particular has really kind of modeled for me the way that humor is a way of kind of attacking without attacking, a way of defending and surviving things that are, you know, hard to get through if you don't have that space to laugh, and to make fun of, and to kind of make fun of yourself before anyone else can.
I remember that opening scene of Caucasia where the two sisters who invented this language are driving around with their father, and they're driving around and they're shouting out the window, sort of Black Power.
And Gawa, Black Power, yes, I did.
Everyone's
that
sort of jumping, and it feels like it's a very prototypical Danzy Senna type humor where there's something, the funniest things that you do, there's a little edge to them. There's a risk, and it feels like you cannot be earnest and be funny at the same time.
No, I think earnestness is actually frightens me, and the way that it can kind of, I feel that there are so many lies embedded in earnestness that it's a dishonest position for me. And humor is the most it's the emotion and the state that I feel holds all of the other feelings that I want to express, of rage or criticism or anxiety, sadness. All those other things are held in humor. And I was reading a book a few years ago that I ended up writing an introduction to by Robert Plunkett, My Search for Warren Harding, and I was realizing how few works of literary fiction are actually funny, because this was really funny. And it's a little bit mean too. I think humor is mean when it's at its best, but it also is usually best when it's almost mean to the person who's speaking it. It's not mean to, it's not punching up, it's not punching down, it's punching oneself in the face. And so I was realizing, you know, I was kind of wanting to create this manic tone in my work that would kind of reveal all the hypocrisies of every different world I was looking at. And to me, it was inherently funny, but also sad and also infuriating and all of those other things.
Yeah, I love colored television for that reason. Is there's a lot of hypocrisies on display here, but especially Jane, the main characters. And for those who haven't read it, Jane is a novelist many years late on her long overdue second novel, which is a kind of unified field theory of what she calls the mulatto race, which is kind of pulling in things from the Melungeons of Appalachia to TV. And she's been given a house to house sit in the Hollywood Hills that's way beyond her her income range. She has a sabbatical. She's got to finish her book. She moves in there with her kids and two kids and her husband, Lenny, who's an artist who paints abstract paintings that don't sell and don't make money. And she's in a state of high anxiety, finishes her book. And the inciting incident of this novel is that she turns it in, sends it out, and it gets returned with a crushing rejection letter, which sends Jane leaping towards the television industry, which she does by borrowing her friend's agent, who he hasn't introduced her to, and his own idea for a comedy about mixed race, black and white family in LA. So that's kind of the setup for the book. And over the escalating tension is that Jane tells that lie, which is that this is her idea to the Hollywood agent, and it just starts a series of lies. And I want you to maybe talk just a little bit before you read about what lies do in a novel, and why they're so explosive.
Yeah, I mean, often when I'm reading my students' work and it's just not going anywhere, I say like, can you make someone lie, please? Because I've been teaching this class for years called Passing and Performance in American Literature and Film. And we start with racial passing, and then we go through all the ways that passing um, and pretending to be something you're not are a plot device, but also like this persistent theme in American um, culture and narratives of American culture. And like going all the way to Hitchcock, like every thriller hinges on a lie. I just watched Fatal Attraction again, and I was like, this is a great propulsive thriller with a lie at the center, and everything I love has a lie at the center. So it sort of, I think, comes from some deep sort of Freudian place in me, like why do I keep getting drawn to lies? But I think that it kind of at the center of some of the best stories that I've ever read or experienced. So it keeps things dangerous, really.
Mm.
And I think, the first draft of this, actually, Jane was not such a liar, and the story had a kind of stasis to it. And it was only when I started to make her as sort of shady as the producer and as some of the other characters that it felt like the story kind of found its pulse.
Well, the lies made me sweat. I just thought, why did you do that? You could have just told him that you're working on the TV show, Jane. And Jane is basically winds up lying to her husband that she's working on this TV show because he's being so supportive of her writing her novel. But it keeps you interested in a way, because you think she's lying for survival in some kind of way. And it's not just simply a plot device. You bring it back to her childhood, her character being biracial, being a black woman of mixed race who's sometimes mistaken for white to some degree, and the fact that people perceive her very existence as some kind of lie.
Yes. It's like imposter syndrome on every single level that she's experiencing. Not only are they living in a house that's not theirs and pretending it's theirs, but she's having an affair in a sense on her husband with another world, of sort of lowbrow art or not art that he looks down upon. So there's so many levels of lying in this story that I had a lot of fun letting the lies pile up.
Well, let's go back to the house, because she actually, before she moves in, she goes to a party at the house.
Yeah, I'll read a little bit from her memory of this house that they're now living in, but that she once visited, who's owned by this very wealthy showrunner named Brett, and her husband Lenny are now living in it, but this is a flashback. Once, years ago, Lenny and Jane had attended a party at Brett's house in celebration of one of his successes, a series that had gotten greenlit or a pilot he'd just sold. Jane couldn't remember which. She did remember Piper, his wife, walking around the party in a silver dress, serving drinks, and how all the other guests had bronze skin and blazing white teeth. Lenny and Jane were the only non-industry people in attendance. They had stood together in a corner, feeling out of place, equal parts superior and ashamed. At one point, Jane had glimpsed their reflection in a gilded floor mirror and thought they looked like a pair of peasants who had wandered in off the street to beg for bread. On their way out, Lenny had grabbed a few cookies off a silver platter, wrapped them in a napkin, and put them in his pocket. On the drive home, he had made his usual snide comments about Brett and Piper, the art on their walls. He called Brett a sellout, tragic mulatto, though Jane argued he wasn't as interesting as all that. He was just another hack cranking out zombie shows. She wondered aloud what it must be like to have such a white-looking child as Max. I mean, does one even consider him mixed race? She asked. Hasn't all the blackness been washed out? It has, for certain, Lenny said. But when it comes time to apply for college, you just know Brett's going to tell him to claim he's some kind of black kid. He'll drag out the old bylaws, the one drop rule, to make Max seem more interesting. That's how they do it. These wily mulattoes be blending into the furniture until blackness seems like it might get you something. God, are mulattoes just awful people? Jane said. Not you. You're the last good mulatto. Brett's from that Tiger Woods school of cluelessness. Jane laughed, but silently, secretly, she had already been imagining what it would be like to live in a house like Brett's someday. She could see Lenny's art on the walls. She could see Lenny standing beside one of his paintings, discussing his work with a curator from Gagosian who wanted to give him a show. In her mind's eye, he was dressed in painter chic, an Oxford shirt and cargo pants, like those he was wearing, but of infinitely better quality. His artwork was the same as his artwork now, splashes of color overlaid on some image you couldn't quite make out but knew was there, the shape of a body lurking beneath a surface of color. But now the world understood what he was doing. They saw his brilliance finally. Jane was there in the fantasy, standing before a table that held copies of her new novel. The book was an object, a real thing, alive outside of her, born. And her children were in the vision too, up past their bedtime. Ruby flitted among the guests in a pink frock with another little girl, because in this dream she'd finally lived in one place long enough to have a real best friend. And Finn was there, standing on the steps in a camel-colored blazer, holding forth like a tiny professor, lecturing a charmed cluster of guests on the history of the solar system. And I'll just stop there. Finn and Ruby are their children.
I love that scene. The novel's kind of storyboarded with her imaginings of what life could have been like, what it might be like, what it would be like if they lived in certain places. But it's also, those imaginings are bouncing off the couple at the heart of the book, Lenny and Jane. And what I find so, you could in some ways see your novels and your stories and your memoir as kind of the ongoing project of a woman born the first generation of parents who were legal to intermarry in 1968, as your parents did, where it was the first time a black man and a white woman could get married and have children legally in Massachusetts. And so you're like the Midnight's Children generation of interracial living. And one of the things this book does in such a profound way is look at intra-black feelings about interracialness, especially in this scene where, Lenny sometimes says some really hostile things in which Jane has to kind of parry them back, and she often disassociates into fantasy. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the ways that, Jane is in this book in particular, it's not like she's having to deflect aggression from necessarily white people dealing with her and being racist. It's actually tension within worlds in which she's dealing with blacks.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed recently when looking at sort of all my work and all the 6 books I've written that progressively, white characters have become less and less a part of my narratives. From Caucasia had the mother as a very large figure, but I think since then I've been much more interested in people of color, kind of, and the politics of us within ourselves. And I've noticed I don't sort of set out to do that, but the white characters have become fewer and fewer. And I'm interested in all of the tensions within group. And I think about like the Harlem Renaissance and the works that I most admire from that time, and the sort of class divisions within the Black community that I see and am observing in this novel. And I'm interested in looking at this moment in particular for people of mixed race and their relationship to the Black community, and the kind of ways that we're both have historically been really invisible and kind of written out of the narrative of America, and subsumed into a sort of a kind of subgroup of Blackness, a kind of extension of Blackness, or we've been kind of hyper visible, you know, in terms of, you see us everywhere, but the narratives of what it is to be mixed, I don't think have really been told. And so I was interested in the kind of ways that our adjacency to whiteness, our adjacency to privilege creates tensions within the Black community, but also for this producer, he sees it as like a cash cow and an opportunity to kind of exploit this identity that he hadn't seen written about or made into a show before. So I was interested in like all of those contradictions, and then just the way the humor, the barbed humor of Lenny and Hampton, but also Jane. I mean, she's talking trash about mixed people all the time too, and only refers to being mixed as mulatto. Like, I think she's kind of going back to this question of humor and earnestness, and you know, she's always speaking with like 10 degrees of irony, as is her husband, and that's sort of the kind of world that I grew up in, where race was never spoken about directly. It was spoken about with, you know, 10 degrees of this levels of meaning beneath it. Oh, I think you're muted, John.
I want to bring in someone who knows a lot about these topics, but also is very funny herself, is a friend of yours, is a California-based writer, who is Porochista Khakpour. She's the author of Suns and Other Flammable Objects, The Last Illusion, Brown album, and most recently, Tehrangelis. Most impressively, though, she is currently in a castle in Italy where it's probably 2:30 in the morning, and is going to make complete and coherent sense as she asks you some questions. Porochista, come on to California Book Club.
Hi, John. Hi, Danzy. I'm so honored to be here. Yeah, I just want to clarify, I'm not normally in a castle in Italy. I got a fellowship. This is not my house. I wish. But it's such an honor to be here, and I just loved hearing you speak. I scribbled so many notes that I don't even know where to begin. But I always want to start just to say like a few words about how we met, because I think it always is always interesting to people. It never stops being interesting to me, because I just love how long it's been. But I'm going to try not to age us too much. But I had the great honor of meeting Danzy in 1999. So that was when you were doing this great little guest professor like stint at Sarah Lawrence. And back then, I think people didn't do one semester, you did a whole year. So I think you'd committed to like a visiting professor year or something at Sarah Lawrence. And I still remember the extreme enthusiasm that me and all the students had when we knew you were coming. I mean, I wish you could have seen it. I still remember when you were announced and we all ran to the bookstore and we got the book because it had been this big bestseller and we were so excited to read it. I think we all read it like before, you know, Sarah Lawrence College is kind of one of these weird schools where you like interview to get into a class, and we pick the professors, but the professors also pick us. It's a very weird, it's one of these weird schools like that. I was a scholarship kid. I was very excited to be there, but I had a lot of confidence at that point as a writer. I felt very, you know, like I knew what I was doing. I had all my cool internships in the city. And then here it was my last year, and I had this opportunity to like study with this amazing writer. I still remember there was a group of lesbians who were like, and she's hot. That was the part of
That's my favorite detail of whenever you talk about this. And I'm glad you retold that.
There was a whole group. You had a lot of lesbians in that class. It was amazing.
A year after Caucasia came out, and it was my first teaching job ever. And I had this completely crazy class, of which Porochista was one of the students. And it was like, I think back to that class and how zany and wild it was. I would come in and tell them about things I shouldn't have been talking about, but it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship for me and Porochista.
I loved it. I thought it was so great. I think you gave us a lot of real life stuff, and we were at a school where people were often talking just about craft, but you also brought everything in, craft and other things in there. And we
and
just
gossip, right?
And gossip. Well, we all
Because
wanted to
every
be you.
novelist is a gossip at their core.
That's true.
So we love stories.
That's true. But I think we also like, we all knew at the time that you were only a few years older than us. So we had this like desire to like be you, you had this whole class of everybody who just wanted
That's
to
why
be.
we're wearing the same glasses right now. It's a whole All About Eve thing.
I swear I had these for age, yeah. But I mean, it's a
I
compliment.
love it.
Anytime
I
people
love it.
say, like anything with us resonates, I'm like, it's an honor. Thank you for that. That's incredible. But anyways, it continued. And so we were friends for ages and we stayed in touch. We got to do a Poets and Writers cover in 2010 that I always think about with a lot of fondness because that was like a really fun interview. The photo shoot always cracks me up because it was so hard to like keep it together because we're always laughing and we always have a lot. Like the challenge right now for me is just not to make jokes like the way like our text messages. I'm always howling with laughter as we're doing them. And I don't know if it was in the Julian Lucas New Yorker article or where it was, but somebody noticed recently that like when they hang out with you, that you have a mischievous quality to you. And it's something that's in your work, but it's in your person too. And I just even noticed it today. And I was like, I think everybody who's around you can't help but want to kind of be a bad kid with you, which is kind of the delight of reading your works too. I mean, this is actually my favorite book by you. I swore that New People was going to be my favorite book. And then before that, I said Symptomatic. And of course, I love Caucasian. Every book of yours is like my favorite book. But this one, especially, I felt that quality of like, like being in like the bad kids chat with you and just cracking up and laughing and like having inside jokes with you. And I feel like every reader has felt this. I've noticed people talking about that. Do you know that? Do you know what I'm talking about? Did you know
Yeah,
that?
no, someone I just gave a reading with someone and they said you seem really wicked. Like you're a wicked person. And I was like, I'm actually really a nice person, but my
Yeah.
work, I'm channeling some more kind of the knives come out when I'm writing, and it's got the veil of fiction, which is what allows you to do that, is that you've changed everything so much in the writing process that I think fiction has always sort of had that function to allow us to be really brutally honest because we're wearing a veil and we're
Yeah.
hiding behind a mask. And that's why it's so freeing to me and why it's like my favorite form to write in, is that it allows all of this conflicting truths to play out on the page too. Like I'm not preaching one point, but I'm allowing like all the characters to say every thought that's ever crossed my mind.
Yeah.
And I don't
Yeah.
have to own those thoughts. I can just let them sit in the mouths of my characters.
It's so nice. I don't know why people don't. I mean, fiction to me is like the only mode, really. I mean, we both done nonfiction too, but fiction for me is just, it's just that realm of like delight and possibility, and
Yeah.
you can do all sorts of fun things, and it's amazing. I mean, I had a question that I have a few questions that actually I didn't get a chance to speak to you, and I just saw you at the launch in New York, which was amazing, and whatever. I've been following the whole thing. It's been so exciting, and I love lately that it's on Good Morning America. I love that it's, cover of the New York Times Book Review. I mean, it's so satisfying in this broken time to see a book get its due and to like watch people just, the contagious joy right now is very, very exciting. So I love this. But I have kind of a boring question. If you don't want to answer boring questions, just, but I don't think I ever got a sense of like how you composed this book and over which period. Like
Mhm.
every time I read a book of yours, it feels like so fluid, so like you manage to write on such a complex craft level, but they're always like page turners. So they look deceptively easy, I think, for some people, but I can see how difficult like it must have been to write this. So I was curious about the composition of it and how you went about it.
Yeah, no, I wanted it to feel, I like writing that sort of feels very simple, but there's like intricate workings underneath it. And I feel, this book, it's interesting because you're a writer, so I think you sense that labor. And I really started it before the pandemic, when my family and I were living in a nursing home, which if you read the novel, you'll see why that comes into it. And we were the only people like under 85 living in this apartment. And this horrible experience where I was working with someone in Hollywood who was very wealthy, and I was trying to impress them. And they wanted to give me their notes, and they said, I'll just come by and drop it at your house. Like, you live in this neighborhood, I know it. And I was like, no, 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 don't come to the house, whatever you do, because I didn't want them to see that we were living in a nursing home. It was like a novel of horror. And the novel really began in that place where I was like, this would be a funny place to bring this character. And so I started it, and I was really having the best time of my life writing it. And then we moved out of the nursing home, and like 2 weeks later, the pandemic hit. Thank God we weren't in the nursing home when this happened, but I put
Wow.
this novel away for over a year. I don't remember exactly how long I put it away because it felt like the world was ending. And I was so sad to be away from it, but it felt like we were living in an apocalypse. And when
Yeah.
I, finally sent my kids back to school, I pulled it out of a drawer, and I felt such relief to be back in this space of sort of manic joy and deviousness and all the things that kind of I wanted to be in at that moment. And the world felt a lot sadder and diminished, but like that felt like even more of a appropriate world to write satire into, was the deeply sad world that we were living in. Actually, that felt like a appropriate reaction to these times.
Oh, I love that so much. I mean, I know the nursing home, so I have a good, it's across the street from the library that I used to write, and I also still write in, actually. So it's amazing. I love that that was written there. Well, that's another thing I wanted to ask you too. It's like this whole thing about satire, we were talking about the other day, and I think for so many people, there's a novelty in like women of color writing satire, which to me is already like such a weird concept. Like, why is it novelty? Like, every woman of color I've ever known is extremely funny, is extremely witty, you know. But I made a tweet like a few weeks ago about like someone should write a thing with my book, your book, Regina Porter's book. There's a whole bunch of books this year. They're rich people satires, and I think a lot of it came out of the madness around the pandemic era, and the circus around it that kind of highlighted how out of touch Americans of a certain class are and what their concerns actually are. But what do you think about this? I mean, I've noticed people talking about it, but are you feeling like I am a writer of satire? And like, what does that bring up for you?
Well, you're from LA and know that in a way this isn't satire. This is realism.
Right.
This is straight up LA,
Realism.
and it's not
Yeah.
that exaggerated to be
Yeah.
heightening that much. But I think comedy is about knowing where to put the white space, knowing where to end the sentence. It's not so much that you're exaggerating, but you're just leaving out the boring bits and kind of highlighting something absurd. And I do think that there's something, I think sometimes satire can be really boring and flat. Like, I like satire that has a human being in it, or comedy that's still got sort of a friction with a sadness or a rage, and that's not just kind of flatly comedic. And I think, to me, there's no kind of contradiction between being a woman and a woman of color and writing comedy, because I think you're kind of constantly reminded of the absurdity of your position in the culture. And if you don't find a place to point that out and to laugh at it, it can destroy you.
Yeah.
So for me, it feels appropriate and it feels organic to my position in the world.
It
But I
makes
think
sense.
that women and women of color especially don't get appreciated for that. It's not that it's not out there, but it's not seen or noticed. And I read the same scene of this book to two different audiences on my book tour, and it was very racially, like, one audience was really white and one audience was predominantly black, and same scene, and one audience like looked at me with tears in their eyes and the other was laughing really hard, and I was like, this is so interesting that this is landing completely differently.
Oh, yeah.
Do
Because
with
I
that
think
what
there's
you want.
earnestness people expect the earnestness, right? And it's like a little bit like, uh-oh, are we allowed to laugh? Can we laugh? Like there's always that question in the US in particular. And I love what you said about like, I mean, maybe that the trick is that we are punching towards ourselves, you know, if you can call that a trick. I think for people, maybe there's a relief in that. But I was also thinking the other day about how much, you know, we have certain topics that we write about. Like I write a lot about Iranian American families, and in a way they're also, you know, I hate this term that my students always like to use, liminal space, but you know what I'm talking about. There is that liminality, right? But do you feel like, I mean, do you feel like in your next book too, that this is a topic? I keep thinking about this with myself, like am I going to continue to write about these topics, but in different forms? I feel like every book of ours kind of does a different thing with ourselves, our identities. I don't think we recycle it the way that sometimes people are tempted to, but I keep thinking like, why don't I just write, like, what if I were to just write something completely boring? I mean, and part of that is, or out of myself. And part of that's been my experience of working with Hollywood too, which I love how brilliantly you talk about here too. And I've learned a lot from you. You've given me a lot of good advice on that. I think that it does a weird thing to a lot of writers, like having that world, that industry alongside this industry, because now you have two industries kind of trying to tell you like who you are and what you're doing. Does this make sense, what I'm saying here?
Yeah, no, I think I'm, I mean, you may have this as well, but like I've been told again since my first novel, like, you know, are you going to write about mixed race characters again? And it's always seemed to be a predicament that I'm writing about, when actually it's a geography and a land that every writer claims, and every writer has a geography that they write from. And for me, every book I'm writing about something completely different, but the space and the world that I'm writing from and the position that I'm writing from feel like the universal to me. Like I think we've always assumed white, straight, male position is the universal. Historically, that's been seen as the one that's not race, that's not gendered, when it's deeply raced and deeply gendered. And so for me, I just reject that fundamentally and feel like I can write every single human condition from the mixed race female point of view. Like that's not limiting to me in any way. And I remember making that choice very early on and feeling like I was going to filter my world and only allow people in who could see what I was doing.
Yeah, I just had somebody tell me, like, why do you want to continue to do this? You have this great choice to not write about this undesirable population, meaning like Muslims or whatever they were trying to say at that point. And I was just like, I swear I thought back to you. I mean, so many things that you've taught me over the years have given me the strength to handle some of those comments. But I actually responded to it with some humor too, because so often you just have to throw that question back to someone. Like, it made me laugh actually. And I think that's also been a great gift you've given a lot of your students, your friends, is the ability to like get out of the very extreme drama of the industries and all that. And I'd love the discussion again of this in the book, because I felt like Jane it many times, said it home a lot. But I think again, it's a great gift. And I think it's very hard to know how to navigate this America sometimes. And I have to say, if I weren't in your class at that point, I don't know if I would have been able to navigate these industries. I think Sarah Lawrence had put me in a sort of overly earnest and very anxious state. And so every time I even talk to you, and just hearing you and John speak too, it's like you give people so much courage to be themselves and to actually delight in being themselves, and to also like laugh at this larger predicament we're in, which I think is just American culture, right? With all its haunted houses. So I know they're going to make
one thing about Porochista is she is from, should I read a little bit more from the book?
Please. Can Danzy
John?
read, John?
Okay. Absolutely. I was going to say, you know, we've been talking a lot about, you know, the way that you see the world and the way you can notice it and make fun. But we want to hear you do it. So if you have a different passage, we'd love to hear you.
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much, Porochista.
That was the most amazing ending too.
I love it. So I'm just going to read a very short bit from Jane is very aspirational. She wants to live in this neighborhood that I'm going to read you a little section about. Today they were going to an open house in the neighborhood Jane had nicknamed Multicultural Mayberry, the neighborhood where she'd always wanted them to live. The house was way out of their price range, given that their price range was $0. But who really knew what their price range might be soon? It couldn't hurt to look. If Josiah offered a lot of money and Lenny sold some paintings on top of Jane's getting tenure and a raise, who knew? They might become members of the functioning middle class sooner than they thought. Multicultural Mayberry was only about 15 minutes from downtown Los Angeles, but it felt like a different world altogether. Gone was the Mad Max beyond Thunderdome energy of downtown. Gone was the Manson family helter-skelter vibe of the hills. Gone was the suburban wasteland of Glendale and the trashy mini-mall sprawl of mid-city. Gone was the relentless existential hum of the freeway, the racial blight of the LAPD, the handsome lying face of O.J. Simpson, and the blank, bewildered face of his murdered wife, Nicole. Gone was the banally, evil face of Mark Furman and the nihilistic cokehead teens of Less Than Zero. Gone were the Menendez brothers and the white vigilante Michael Douglas played in Falling Down. Movies over the years had depicted Los Angeles and its outskirts as a kind of dystopian, futuristic hellscape, a clarion warning for the rest of the world about where we were all headed. But Multicultural Mayberry made it feel as if none of that existed. The most charming aspects of America's past had made love to its most hopeful, Obama-esque future, creating this love child of a town. And I'll just stop there from that description. And a fun fact is that Porochista grew up in Multicultural Mayberry.
So okay, let's talk about that, because there's several questions from the audience about, was it based on a specific LA community?
Yes, it is based on South Pasadena, which is a little hamlet, just like I described, and it prides itself on being very multicultural and diverse and having these great blue ribbon public schools. And people move here with their children because they want to live in this fantasy land. But one of the other funny details about it is that all of the movies and shows you've seen set everywhere in America are filmed in this neighborhood, and they have a filming office. And the first time I came here in like October, in the heat of October in LA, they had a snow machine in the center of town, and there was like a snowman, and they were filming a scene with snow, and it was supposed to be like Ohio. So I loved the surreal quality to this neighborhood and how much it's used in 30-something. PV's Playhouse is set here. Halloween, the original Halloween is here. Mike Myers killed his sister here. So it's very LA.
One of the most realistic portraits I found in the book is, of course, of Hampton, the producer that is sort of Jane's matched up with, because he's just had a hit with a Black TV show, and he's gotten a development deal with a
streaming network.
Yeah, and he's fascinated by her, and he sort of gloms onto her and kind of workshops her ideas until you know where he's going. He's sort of heading towards the motherlode of all of her ideas, which is, I'm not going to give it away, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that kind of person, not whether it's based on someone, but I've met a few producers, and there's this incredible like lack of boundary and externalization. You know, eating in front of you while having a meeting is like a power move. Can you just talk like about what it's like to live in this world where people, you have to deal with people like this in your day-to-day life? I'm sure all of them are wonderful.
Yeah, I think
Some of them
before
are listening.
she meets with him, she's in the on the toilet that night before, looking up his net worth, because you can look up people's net worth. And when she first meets him, he's eating an egg white omelet, has a green smoothie and an assistant, a very beautiful Nigerian American assistant, and he's just come from his trainer, and she thinks I want those things in my life. I want the green smoothie, the egg white omelet, the assistant, the trainer. She's just kind of mesmerized by this man's casual sort of wealth. And he's also sort of like the chosen Black person that Hollywood picks someone, plucks them, and says, you're going to be the gatekeeper. You're going to be our token who's going to pick diverse content and kind of translate the world for us. And he's kind of readily taking on this role of doing this and deciding where culture is made, how it's represented. And he sees her as this gold mine when he realizes that, you know, mixed race people are the fastest growing demographic in the United States, and she's going to be his guide through the land of mulattoes. And it's such an absurd situation, but I've found in all of my dealings in Hollywood that that's why I don't really see the book as satire, is that the most absurd things are spoken in those meetings. And it's so kind of baldly exploitative and capitalist, like it's not under the surface. It's right there. And it's almost refreshing the first time you come up against that, because I feel the literary world has it a lot more coded. But when you go into these meetings, it's like, how are we going to sell your race? And can we make this into something that will appeal to the broadest amount of people?
One of the funniest escalations in the book is the series of ideas that Jane sort of coughs up under duress. Can you describe some of these?
Well, there's the Labradoodle episode. The husband in her show realizes that when he walks around with their giant Muppet like Labradoodle, the police don't harass him. Like it's a sort of neutralizing magical dog. She's trying to find episodes that are about race and deal with biracial issues, but she keeps missing the mark because they're not biracial enough. They're just a little too weird, a little too absurd to appeal to this broad market that he wants to appeal to. So I like the idea of like failed pitches as a whole genre. And you know, there's a lot about spitting into vials, how everyone mixed gets their 23andMe results, and what that means when you get your numbers, and all of that. She's kind of trying to mine for comedy.
Well, and that's very different from, you know, Lenny is kind of angry at her for having done that, because her DNA will be owned by, well, now is owned by, I think BlackRock bought
Yeah.
the biggest.
Well, she says, you know, that every mixed race person cares more about solving the mystery of their identity than they do about getting away with murder someday. Because I realized that now they have my DNA. I can't commit these crimes. My DNA is, yeah.
You do a book, you wrote a whole book though about your background, because your family, your mother's side, you know, they were professors at Harvard and published authors. Generations back, your grandfather was editor of The Atlantic. And on your father's side, there were stories.
And they were slave traders, my mother's
and slave traders.
Yeah.
Yes. And
let's not forget.
But you know, to get to the bottom of your other side, it requires almost like the 2/3 of the book.
Yeah, it's really about my Black family and the mystery of that heritage, which has been, you know, systematically erased and discarded, whereas the white side was sort of books written about street names, buildings named after, and then kind of as a microcosm of American culture, I was looking at my family history.
Well, you know, I thought about that book a lot, because as Jane is having these conversations with Hampton, she's trying to figure out which part of herself. It's like she's sort of like giving him more and more ridiculous things, but she's also getting closer and closer, even if it's through a very refracted and distorted form of comedy, to the heart of what her life is. You know, it's about class anxieties, it's about marriage, and she's sort of getting close to giving him everything that matters to her in some way, but in order to keep a job. And I wonder, when you've been dealing with Hollywood, which does ask a lot, how have you if you can talk about it, set your own boundaries where you think, you know what, that's actually the line where I think I'm off this train, or, these are the things I want to talk about. These are the things I want to work about. And these other things I'm not so interested in doing.
I mean, luckily for me, I have a day job and I primarily think of myself as a novelist, and I still have hope in my world and future as a novelist. And I wanted to kind of have a character who that hope was gone. And because I do think even, what I'm doing in my fiction is I'm noticing a small part of myself, and then I'm a small hideous part of myself. And then I'm taking that and I'm creating something out of that little glimmer of shame or degradation that I want to explore. And for me, I did have the first time I had these meetings, I really believed everything they were telling me, like all the hyperbole was like I'm a genius and what I said was brilliant and amazing. Everything I said was like lighting up the room. And then I would just never hear from these people again. And I thought it would just be funny to kind of like remove some of the safety nets and put her into the space where she's going to be very susceptible. And she's also already a very susceptible character. Like I've shown with the psychic when she first meets her husband, she's someone who doesn't have a boundary with people. So I wanted to, and the advice she gives to her students, the writing teacher, is make it worse. And I think in some ways I was taking something that was already bad and seeing if I could push it a little further with Jane.
Well, because it's 3 a.m., I want to bring Porochista back on because we're winding down. And as she comes back on, just want to read a comment from Naima Dean, who wrote, "As a mixed race adult born in 1967 in San Francisco to a white mother and a black father, I too have always identified as an other. Caucasia definitely spoke to me, but every title has been identifiable in some way. Looking for a space of belonging as a multifaceted mixed race being. Who am I? Where do I fit? Am I white? Am I black enough? Would it be different if my mother was black and father white? How would life be different if?" I wonder if that's something the both of you could speak to, because, Porochista, the Iran-Iraq War kind of created your existence in America in a way, and you must also have, in a different sense, different from Danzy, but a similar sense, like my life would be different if this other thing didn't happen. And I wonder if you too exist in that sense of the multiverse.
I think about that a lot, actually. There's a book project I'm working on here that's actually kind of directly imagines that, actually, if I never came to the US, or if the Iran-Iraq War never happened, if the revolution never happened. And I think that's the idea always, is that like I would have still been a writer, we would have still been writers, but I'm kind of exploring like, what if I wouldn't have been, what if I would have just been a housewife with kids, or, not just but just different than what I am now, which is like a very much a Jane-like struggling writer who's taking Hollywood.
I feel like this character is
let me change everything for money. Like I'm like in that place where, because everything Danzy's saying is so truly real. I mean, I just even made a Facebook post today after a Hollywood meeting last night that was like about this, like where I was just like, whatever you guys want, I guess, but also I felt like it was refreshing, right? Because what you say about the literary world is also very true. We don't ever really know where we stand with anyone in our communities, because everybody's so polite or so coded, or the industry is so inscrutable, even for the people in it. So yeah, it's kind of like there are so many unknowns and so many complications that it's almost like liberating, because it all like cancels each other out.
Yes.
I still remember getting my first acceptance for a poem, and I had to show it to my partner like it was a hieroglyphic. I was like, "Is this yes or no? I don't understand." And it was really, really convoluted. And I wonder, Danzy, if living in LA, if you feel like you have a tiny buffer from these kind of things that Porochista was just talking about, the kind of willful inscrutability of an old industry.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, a couple of ideas around that. One is that I finished every single book I've written in Los Angeles. even when I was living in New York, I finished Symptomatic. I came out here to finish Symptomatic. I finished Caucasia at UC Irvine in Southern California. Like something about California has been very liberating for me as a writer. And um, it's allowed me to kind of let go of some very oppressive histories that I was born out of. And also the city is kind of it's both. I think Jane says this at one point, like she's never felt as lonely or as free as she has in Los Angeles. And I find that there's something about the geography here that allows me to spend half of my life in a kind of dream state, for better or worse. I'm driving around thinking about my characters. The whole city is an industry based on lies, and that's been very, um, you know, somehow freeing for me as a writer. Um, and I think that television also is an interesting form, and I do still work in it and play in it. And it's, I think it's doing some things around race and comedy and tonalities that the literary world has in it but hasn't rewarded. So I find living between genres is actually very liberating for me. I think I can free up myself in either genre because I'm not committed to either. For what, I don't know what that says about me, but I find that freeing.
Well, I'm so glad that you have that space and that you take it to play, because this book was just, hours of enjoyment and fun. But it was also just such an adult pleasure. It made me think. It had deep psychology. It had like real sex between a couple, in the sense of that sort of sexy, but awkward, but angry, but, giving in. It's just so much about it that's wonderful. There's a lot of love for you in the chat here. We should let Porochista go to bed. It's 9:05, so we're out of time, but it's been a real pleasure, Danzy, talking
Thank
about
you so
colored
much.
television. If you haven't read it yet, highly recommend it. You can also start here from way long ago. This is the other book.
Wow, that's an old draft.
Memoir.
Yeah.
And
Wow,
Do the
cool.
journey, read all of them. They're so
Oh my
fun,
God.
so satisfying.
Thank you. Thank you for all the wonderful writing about the book too. I got to see some of the essays in Alta, and they were just so smart. I saw things in the book I didn't know were there. So thank you so much for this. I feel this was my love letter, this book, to California. So feels like
California
this
definitely
is,
loves you back.
thank you.
Blaze, do you want to come on and walk us out and tell people what to do now?
Yeah, wow. Just thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you. What a great evening. Thank you, Danzy. Thank you, Porochista. Thank you, John. And thank you, everyone who logged on. We had people, from New Orleans, Boston, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Canada, everywhere. And so you've just been a great audience tonight. The program was recorded, so it will be published tonight on altaonline.com. So come watch it again, share the link. You'll also receive a thank you note in tomorrow's email with links to all the cool things that were discussed tonight. And be sure to join us next month. On October 17th, we'll host Tobias Wolff and This Boy's Life. We'll also be doing numerous events as part of the Bay Area's Litquake Festival, including a live CBC event on October 18th at the Verdi Club. It's sure to sell out for those here in the Bay. So get your tickets now. It's going to be it's going to be a really fun event. Freeman's going to be there. And then the following day, we're also going to have a booth at the Litquake Book Fair at Yerba Buena Center. And again, we'd really be honored if you could think about becoming a member. For $50, you get, again, our award-winning quarterly magazine. Look at all these great issues we do. And then we're also adding in the first 5 years of Altitude, which is the back page of our distinguished publication. So check us out or become a digital member for $3 a month. And again, this is my hat. I had to run upstairs and get it. You got multiple colors, got tote bags, the CBC, the Didion, you name it. Lots of cool merch. So check us out. And I'm going to show you too. This is the next issue. So again, you visit altaonline.com and please, support our partners, support Danzy, buy this book. It's really, really great. And finally, we'd be grateful if you would participate in a 1-minute survey that's going to pop up on your screens as soon as we end the event. So thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and stay safe, and we'll see you next month. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.